Hey, good morning and welcome to our webinar. Exciting to be talking today again. I missed our last session. This is our fourth How to webinar, and this series of masterclasses we talk about how to bring users into the design and development process. Today's particular focus will be in the very early stages of user development journey. So we'll be looking at opportunity mapping and early stage ideation with users, but a little bit more on that later. I'm your host today. I'm Ville. I'm the founder and CEO of LeanLab. And my co-speaker today is Lotta. She's heading up our customer success. Welcome, Lotta.
Thanks. Hi, everyone.
And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A box that you can find on the right-hand side of the webinar software. So we'll cover some of the Q&A questions at the very end of the webinar today. Right, okay, so I think we're ready. Let's dig in. I recently came across an article that was kind of covering at how product launches fail, and the number of failures is obviously staggering. It's anywhere between 70, 80, 90, 95%, depends on who do you believe. But one particular article that was on Harvard Business Review caught my interest. They had been looking at product failures over a course of 7 years, and they were able to kind of map out a list of reasons why the product launches failed, and they were able to map it up to 40 different ways to fail along the product development funnel. And then I took a closer look at those reasons, 40 reasons, and staggering 13 reasons out of 40. So that means over 1/3, 35% of the failures were attributed to no user research, no user collaboration, no user understanding along the product development funnel. And why are these companies failing? And it's due to the flat user learning blueprints. Let me explain what I mean by this. So here on the horizontal axis, you can see, you might say a typical product or service development journey from opportunity identification down to mid stages of prototyping and ultimately releasing your service. And then on the vertical axis, you can see the accumulated user learnings. So the number of times you learn from your users along the product or service development funnel. And these companies that are constantly failing, they are really struggling with their flat user learning blueprints. So as you can see there, the only first time that you start learning from your users is actually the very bottom of the product development funnel when you release. So you start ideating with internal needs at a very early stages. That's where it goes wrong already. It's based on gut feels. It's based on new technical fads that people might like, and you decide to develop your products and services around them. Then in the mid stages, you have oversight in terms of making maybe the design too complex. You're trying to feel like an internal need with your new products or feature. And then, like I said, the very last stage is the first time you start learning from the actual users. And this is a not very smart way of developing services, because you obviously have all the energy and resources committed pushing out that new feature or pushing out that new service. And it's very, very difficult at release stage to go back a stage and start revamping, start doing the product anew again. So this is something that you got to start changing, and I'll introduce a way you can start winning with users. And this is what we call the continuous user learning blueprint. So from the very beginning, you set yourself for a different trajectory. So you're continuously learning from your users at each stage of the development. So you bring the users in early, you work with them through your concepting and prototyping phase. You work with them through your release, you run beta programs and so on. And that's kind of when you go into the release cycle. And that's where you really improve your opportunities for success. And depending kind of where you are on that curve now, and where you could be on that curve is what we call the user-led innovation opportunity gap. And today, our focus, like I outlined, is in the very early stages of the development journey. And this is obviously a critical part because this is kind of where the initial wins start happening. So working tightly with users, the very early stages will kind of set you, on a much successful path and trajectory later on. So we'll be discussing 3 steps in this early stage ideation with users. And then we'll be sharing 5 practical tips. And then we'll round off with the Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. So without further ado, let me hand over to Lotte to take us through the early stages of product development journey. Thanks.
Thanks, Ville. So what is user-led ideation in a sort of quick summary form? Essentially is about genuinely understanding your users' needs and having a systematic way to ideate and generate ideas from your users. So here we then have our 3 steps that's important to have as part of your user-led ideation. So starting with your opportunity mapping, so going into that, generally understanding your users, so really understanding what their users' needs, values, expectations, pain points are, to really start identifying what the opportunities then are to improve and enhance the current experience. How can you service your users even better? And once we have started identifying those opportunities, then it's important to also generate and gather development ideas from your users. So having that idea generation as part of your process. So this essentially means asking your users to give you development ideas to ensure that you widen the pool of ideas that you have to go from and start developing and improving and enhancing that experience. And finally, when we mapped opportunities, generated ideas, it's important to also involve your users in prioritizing those ideas. So really understanding what, from a user's perspective, do they consider to bring the most value, what evokes the most interest among them. So bringing that into the pool of thinking, what brings value to you as a business, but what perspective do users think about it from, what really brings them value when prioritizing those development ideas. So how do we then implement this 3-step process? What are the sort of practical ways to start doing this? So next we'll go through the 5 practical ways to integrate this 3-step process into your user-led ideation. Starting from, firstly, user segmentation. So this is something as part of your opportunity mapping, idea generation, as well as prioritization. It's always important to understand who you're doing these things with. So what user segments are you ideating together with? Really understanding, are they, for example, early adopters or adverse to change, as an example. User segmentation can be something that organizations struggle with or get a bit stuck on. So here's a simple framework where to start from. Essentially just 2 dimensions to start segmenting your users from. Firstly, from understanding whether they're a low frequency or high frequency user for a service, for example, so how frequently they are using your service. Or thinking about an e-grocer as an example, how frequently do they buy groceries online? Or how frequently do they buy groceries from you online specifically, to start segmenting what different user groups you have within your user base. And adding an additional dimension to this in terms of, well, what is the potential of the different user segments that you have? So what potential do you have to add value to that user? So going back to the e-grocer example, for example, your high potential, high frequency user could be a user who frequently shops for groceries online and wants to do more so as well. So they're really looking to do the most of or all of their shopping online and want to have a good experience around that. So there you have huge potential to provide a great experience to that user segment. Then on the other side of that scale, even if we have a food shopper who frequently buys groceries online, but they only really buy specific products and aren't really expanding their basket as such in terms of what products and products they buy from the online grocery store, their potential is then lower on that scale in terms of how you can add value to them and service them better. So understanding this difference, it's important to start understanding also how that affects then the ideation process. Secondly, once we have the user segmentation understanding as part of our process, we then move on to the opportunity mapping. And this opportunity mapping should really be done together with users. And as I said, this is really where you go into genuinely understanding your users. So really going into what their wishes, pain points, values, needs, and expectations are when it comes to your product or service, but more also as a whole. And this is something that you can start approaching by through this simple pyramid that we've mapped out. So again, as I said, the easiest points to maybe start mapping is the wishes and pain points on this pyramid. And you can already get started with those. But as you then doing the opportunity mapping with users, you should slowly start building understandings of the expectations, needs, and values as well. So thinking about the e-grocery example again, so you might have identified wishes and pain points for some users, but going into deeper will help you identify how to service them better. For example, users that look for the in-store experience, so they still look for a social experience together with their family when they go out shopping. How do you then bring in the online world to that and still support their needs surrounding that experience as well? So it's important to start adding that depth into that opportunity mapping to really understand where the gaps are and how you can really kind of enhance the experience to your users. So thirdly, as once we've done the opportunity mapping, we're really moving on to the idea generation phase, one of which kind of first important steps is crowdsourcing user-led ideas. So asking for those development ideas from your users as well. This doesn't mean that the users specifically say to you, this is what we want, and that's the final execution. The kind of more famous example of Ford saying that users wanted faster horses and they developed a car, but essentially by users sharing faster horses, they were still indicating the need behind there. So they wanted a faster and more convenient way to get from point A to B. It was then up to Ford's team and their ingenuity to come up with the result to answer that need. But it's still valuable input, an idea from the users to really help expand that pool of development ideas that you have to work from. One way to systematically help you gather these development ideas is to implement a user advisory board. So what do we mean by a user advisory board? In its simplest form, it could be 20 to 30 users that you engage with regularly and ask for feedback and development ideas on how they think that the service or product can be improved. On a larger scale, it can be being even more systematic and iterative together with your users by implementing a user community or a user lab to really help systematically engage users in that idea generation process. So gathering those systematically. And once we are gathering the ideas from users, a second point, or the fourth point essentially for the idea generation side, is also doing user-led market understanding. So putting it into a larger context, having users evaluating essentially the market together with users, and that way identifying different opportunities. You really had a great example of how one of our customers has done this before.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities there. In one particular case, there was a UK-based client, and they wanted to understand how their customers feel about other online shopping websites. And we gave them a task to go and explore outside of their vertical different shopping portals, all the way down to the kind of the last stage of the shopping process. And we gave it to 100 customers on their private customer lab, and then within the next day they had huge amounts of new information, new ideas, how people are experiencing the different online shopping experiences and what the opportunities are. So it gave them lots of fresh ideas to start working on and start kind of considering, are they worth bringing into their own shopping online shopping portal. So that's a fantastic way to get outside the box, a little bit like sending your customers to mystery shop on your behalf and then sharing those ideas with you.
Great, thanks, Ville. Yeah, they're particularly the importance of venturing out of your industry. Users' expectations aren't built just around your industry related to your products and services. They come from the market as a whole, so it's important to have that perspective as part of the ideation. Then finally, as we've identified those opportunities, we're generating ideas. The fifth practical way is essentially having that user-led idea prioritization. So not just having them generate the ideas, but also involving your users in prioritizing those. What is it that brings them most value? What evokes the most interest among your users, to really help you narrow and focus down which ideas to proceed with down the development funnel. And some methods to help you with the idea prioritization together with users. One of the sort of the smallest scale or the simplest ways is essentially just doing some voting exercises together with users, having them vote on which ideas they find most interesting or think that would bring most value to them as part of the experience. That can be a really quick way for you to get forward and help you prioritize the development areas. Then on a more sort of wider, fuller scale, at the other end of the scale, we have essentially an opportunity sizing survey. This is where you would then start quantifying the different opportunities or ideas and their potential, and doing even it on a sort of quantified segment level. Which segments are we really servicing with this idea, or how many of our segments do we provide additional value to through the different ideas that we have? So really kind of bring an additional depth into that prioritization. But in between these two options, you obviously have variations of this within the scale. So the key thing is just to get going, at least get started with the voting, and then expanding from there, depending on a little bit of what your ideation process looks like. So there we had our 5 practical ways of implementing the 3 steps ideation process. So really key things to remember just there: the opportunity mapping side of things. You have your idea generation, having a few ways to do that, remembering the market context there as well. But then also the prioritization. So involving your users in prioritizing those ideas to really help you focus on the things that will bring value and help enhance the experience for users. So next, let's have a look at a couple of examples of how you can do this in practice with users. So our first case example is around the opportunity mapping side of things. So we know how our users are interacting with our service, we know the satisfaction levels, but we don't really have a way to identify what opportunities there are to enhance that experience. So just as a recap, so the known are how our users are interacting with the service today, how satisfied they are, but we don't really know how to improve the experience. What opportunities do we have there, and what do our users really value, need, and expect? And one way to start answering these questions is then, for example, running a qualitative diary study with a smaller group of users, really understanding the users and the different user segments' needs, expectations, pain points in greater detail. And through that, really starting to understand what the gap between these and the current experience are. How can it really be elevated? An online a qualitative diary study like this will really help you start mapping the needs, expectations, and pain points, and also start understanding what the opportunities then are across the different user segments. And one really good way to start then mapping that out together with your team is building those detailed user profiles to really start understanding the differences between the user segments in detail. And in terms of a next step, it's then good to start thinking about how do we quantify or validate the identified opportunity areas to better understand the potential of them. Our second case example is related to the crowdsourcing of user-led ideas. So how do we have an efficient way to crowdsource those ideas? So in the known, in this case, you are probably already receiving some user-led ideas, but they're coming from different sources, so you don't really have a good way of dealing with them, and it's difficult to systematically collect them and prioritize them. So the unknown then remains of what development ideas do our different users really have? How do they think that our product or service can be improved? And what really brings them the most value? What evokes the most interest among our users? And one way to approach this is setting up an ongoing ideation forum where users can add and share their ideas in terms of how they feel that the product service can be improved, but also help by prioritizing. Here they could vote for those ideas, which are the ones that they feel would enhance the experience for them, or which evokes their interest overall, but also what really brings that value to the users. But yeah, so from something like this, you can then learn what evokes that interest among users, what ideas do they have, how do they think that experience can be improved. With an ideation forum, something to think about as well as an organization is that how focused you need to have, how focused the ideation forum needs to be. So for larger organizations with various different touch points across the user journey or engagement points, it's important to start focusing that down so that you don't end up with quite a random or too scattered of a way of gathering the ideas. So focusing down on, say, the sign-up process or the customer service side of things will help you more systematically gather those ideas and ensure that you're getting the quality and the value out of that ideation process as well.
Thanks, Lotta. Really great stuff there. We have a few minutes, so if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and we'll cover some of the questions at the very end of the webinar. Before we get there, I think one of the key takeaways, along with the great tips that Lotta's been sharing on the early stage of development journey, is kind of understanding where you want to be as a company, uh, with your own user learning blueprints. And you obviously need to understand that it's a journey. It's kind of like flexing muscles. You can't become a heavy lifter in one day. So you need to understand where you are, where is your team, what resources you have available to you, and what's your starting point. But let me just give me three ideas here in terms of where you could be. So, for example, if you're just starting user-led development and user-led innovation type work, um, then it's probably enough if you just start sending out regular surveys to your customers. You start understanding how their customers are interacting with your service. What are the wishes and pain points, from the pyramid that Lotta shared earlier, and that will kind of, help you to get started, and it will kind of get you the first insights from your users. Start organizing regular chats with your customers, using customer advisory boards. They can be offline, they can be online, using Lean Lab platform for that. Then if you're on the kind of next level, so you're already working with users to some extent in your product development journey. Some companies are already really good at kind of prototyping phase and involving users at the later stages. But then, you might have gaps in the early stage of innovation. So start thinking about how you can bring your users earlier in the process. So not all the development that you come up with is based on the kind of internal thoughts and ideas. So you can kind of bring more users into that early stage process and start building your competitive advantage by having just simply more ideas available to you and more consumer-led ideas or user-led ideas. So that would be, for a company that is kind of at the intermediate level, to start thinking about how you can improve along this product development journey. Then if you're already fairly mature and advanced, so you're like a champion in the user-led development, your organization has kind of adopted that way of working, then it's possibly a question, okay, how can you further improve that process? So maybe it's down to digital tooling to kind of get more effective the way you work with your users. Maybe it's to do with kind of increasing your testing cycles. So instead of testing once, maybe you can have few iterations at a very early stage, a little bit later, across the different phases. Or thirdly, it could be a question that you want to start democratizing the user-led way of working. So you may kind of open it up beyond your own team and start inviting your organization and your other colleagues and staff members to that process. So they would be able to start work directly with users. So some food for thought there to think about. And obviously, if you have any questions about the learning blueprint, or you want to spar with us, then I'd be happy to help and share my thoughts on where you could be on that journey. Just feel free to ping me an email or reach out to Lotta. I'd be happy to help you. Right, let's wrap up with a quick Q&A. We have a couple of questions. There was one from about how do you quantify the problems that you might come up. So perhaps a typical scenario is that users or customers will share some of the challenges or problems that they have, but then how do you quantify that it's a big enough problem to start tackling? So what are your thoughts on that, Lotta?
Yeah, I think there your user segmentation comes into play very heavily in terms of being able to understand then for how many user segments does that problem, for example, occur. So that will help you quantify how big of a problem it is. Because having that understanding of the user segments as well is also then understanding how big of a pool they represent within your user base, which is again a way to kind of quantify how large of a problem it is down the line. But also going back to the opportunity mapping there as well, by identifying or understanding the needs and values of your different user segments will also bring you that structure in terms of what to reflect upon when you find a problem, essentially, and how large of that is. Is it something that is fundamental to our different user segments when you look at their needs and expectations of the product and service.
Yeah, and then we had another question about the Eric Ries's book about the lean startup and the kind of philosophy there, which feels that it's not kind of involving users at all. It's kind of building very quickly and then, you know, kind of going always being in the release phase and then learning from your users. So what are your thoughts on that? Is the kind of working with users obsolete in that kind of way of working?
No, I don't think it is. I think even if you want to test something in real market quickly, that initial insight should in some way still be based on users and their needs, expectations, in one way or another. So you can still drive insights from that information, even if you want to move quickly and test it in market. I think the risks grow if you forget about the users or don't have that context at the bottom of that sort of lean startup push forward.
Yeah, we come across a similar question when we have organizations doing like heavy A/B testing. So you're trying to A/B test your way through with very small iterations to your service, and it can be a really long way, because if you don't have a good grip of your users, then you end up doing a whole lot of tests before you get there. And if it's a purist A/B test way, then you still don't know why is it working, and then when it stops working, you have no idea again. So I think bring the users in an agile and lean way will help you to, you know, win faster, do less insane number of A/B tests, and kind of get it right earlier on. I think that's something that is important, that you can sync up your agile development with agile user insights. That's what we have time for today. So really, thank you everybody for tuning in for our session today. Before we close, there is a next masterclass coming up in the mid-April, late April, and there we focus on the release phase. So how to work with users just when you are about to go into release phase, how to iron out the last bugs, how to work with users in that phase. So stay tuned. We'll share sharply more information about that. And thank you, Lotta, for taking us through your thoughts and practical tips. So start working with your users today. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye.